Our capacity to love is limited by our ability to love ourselves. We won't give more love to another that's authentic than we can give to ourselves. If we can't be honest with ourselves, we become unconscious about the fact that we're not being honest with other people. Really, the first and most important question of all spiritual development is, who am I?
Today I'm joined for the sequel, a second interview with Mr. Paul Chek, world-renowned expert in the fields of corrective wellness or high-performance exercise kinesiology, stress performance, holistic wellness, integrated lifestyle. We're going to go into topics like kinesiology, the wisdom of the body. We're going to talk about the 4 life process archetypes, love as an evolution, and many more topics.
You can't escape the reality of kinesiology, and you cannot possibly separate kinesiology from spirituality, because one side of the coin is the person in the body and the other side of the coin is the body itself, and the two are always in a two-way relationship with each other. When I was a fighter on the Army boxing team, after I won a championship fight, unfortunately, I hit this guy so hard, the doctors could barely wake him up. I had the realization that all the years living with a father that was that dangerous had channeled themselves through me, and that it was my father that hit this guy. It was my fear of my father. It wasn't really me, the boxer. On a weekend, the next day, we got to the boxing team, and I said to them, I have a question for you. How many of you became boxers because your father was violent and you felt if you didn't learn to fight, he was going to really hurt you or somebody in your family, and you felt like you had to protect you and your family? Of the 30 fighters on the team, 28 hands went up.
Greetings. Welcome back to the Dr. Espen podcast. I am your host, Espen. Today I'm joined for the sequel, a second interview with Mr. Paul Chek, world-renowned expert in the fields of corrective wellness or high-performance exercise kinesiology, stress performance, holistic wellness, integrated lifestyle. And for the last 40 years and more, Paul's helped clients around the world, but he's not just a specialist in the body. He is a teacher in many different ways of esoteric science, of what it means to love, what it means to live. And we had some great conversation before we even pressed record as to some of the topics that we'd like to cover today. So I just want to bring your attention before we bring Paul on to the previous interview that we just did. This episode 90 on the Dr. Espen podcast. It's called Spirit Gym, A Path to Self-Discovery, where we discussed awakening, what awakening really means, the nature of God and the nature of love, the role of strife and struggle in the path of awakening. That was a really meaningful conversation. The role of pain in spiritual awakening, understanding the pain teacher, which I have a feeling we might touch on today. What is the pain as a teacher? The power of conscious creation. And of course, we went into much of the details of Spirit Gym as well. So today we're back with the sequel. We're going to go into topics like kinesiology, the wisdom of the body. We're going to talk about the 4 life process archetypes, love as an evolution, and many more topics. Mr. Paul Chek, it's a pleasure to have you back, sir.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks for jumping on, brother.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's dive straight in. I mentioned one of the things that I'm really interested in, which is how the body never makes a mistake, is my hypothesis. It's, some say the body is the barometer of the soul. The body is intelligent. Some say even the body and the subconscious mind is synonymous. And we talk about this thing called kinesiology. Now, I think for me, it's really underrated. And I just want to touch on that point because we got a lot of questions from the last podcast. For me, my understanding of this is that kinesiology is a way to speak to the subconscious and to get answers that the body or the subconscious might already have, but we might not be able to know or how to decipher the language. Correct me if I'm wrong. Please tell us, what is kinesiology and how is it best applied?
Kinesiology is a science of human movement. So you have to keep in mind that life is movement. As a therapist, I know more about a person from the time they walk from the front door to my treatment room than their mother usually knows, because I understand what I'm looking at. And because the psyche expresses itself through the body and through movement. For example, when you look at the science of communication and language, 55% of communication is posture and gesture. Only 45% of it is the spoken word. So we're actually picking up a lot more from the way people hold and move their bodies than we are from what they're saying. And oftentimes people are sending double messages. For example, how many times have you asked somebody, "How are you doing today?" And they said, "Oh, yes, I'm doing fine." In other
Shaking your
words,
head.
their body language was saying something completely opposite to their words. And so there, what you see is there's a double message being sent, which always leads to confusion, because somebody's saying, okay, why is this person telling me they're doing fine? But in my heart and in my gut, I feel that that's not what's going on at all. And so you see, if our eyes were closed when we asked them, "How are you doing today?" and we only heard the words, we would not actually be able to get to the deeper core of what's really going on. As a metaphor, the body does not have a mechanism for lying, because to lie in nature, to lie in a tribal culture, would ultimately increase the chances of death, which is why, for example, muscle testing, which is applied kinesiology, is used by doctors all over the world to figure out what's actually going on with somebody. So the analogy I give is, let's say you're in a tribal society and there was a food shortage and everybody was starving. So you're out with your tribe and you're looking all over for food. You're walking through the jungle and one of you spots a tree off the path, sneaks off, grabs a bundle of bananas, eats them all. Instead of sharing them with the tribe, goes back to the tribe looking guilty. And they say, "Did you find any food?" And they say, "No." Well, now they've got a belly full of food, but they're only one person, and you can't survive alone in the wild. So whenever we tell a lie, we actually decrease our chances of survival, because it's very well known that it's nearly impossible to survive in nature alone, which is why one of the reasons why we are so group oriented, because it's a survival mechanism. So, Candace Pert wrote a great book called Your Body is Your Subconscious Mind. And she went in great detail to explain that. A lot of people don't understand the difference between the subconscious and the unconscious. They use those two, interchangeably, which is just a misunderstanding. The subconscious mind is the wisdom of the body and the cells and the intelligence of the body. The unconscious mind has multiple layers. You have a personal unconscious. You have a shadow, which is part of your unconscious. It's the repressed material that you don't want to look at for various reasons, or that you're not ready to heal because it's too traumatic to look at it. Then you have the collective unconscious, which is everything that's ever happened and is happening on the planet for the history of the planet. Then you have a solar unconscious, which is everything that's ever happened throughout the solar system. Then you have a galactic unconscious. Then you have a universal unconscious, or a cosmic unconscious. And, part of the problem with human beings, they think they're the only ones in the universe or even in the solar system, which is, just part of the materialistic, myopic way of relating. Your unconscious holds a memory of everything that's ever happened from inception to the present moment. And the unconscious is actually incorrectly named. The unconscious isn't unconscious at all. And it's easy to demonstrate that. Hypnotists all over the world bring people up on stage and do interviews with them, and people that, for example, have been abducted by aliens or things that are very strange and unusual, but have no memory of it. Once you put them under hypnosis, they can give you exquisite details. People that were sexually traumatized or abused as children, but have no conscious memory of it, yet their body behaves as though there's a problem. And so the therapist sees, okay, you're not inhabiting your pelvic girdle. You can try all the right exercises, but if somebody is withdrawing their spirit or their psyche from a part of their body, which is a protective mechanism from trauma, a therapist can sense that, but then they start questioning the person and the person has no recollection. Then you put them under hypnosis, they tell you exactly what happened. People can remember, interestingly, at any level of age, all the way back to their earliest childhood memories, they can not only remember, what color the birthday cake was and what type it was and who was at the table, but they can tell you what was going on behind them, where the eyes weren't even looking. So the unconscious is only unconscious to the ego, but through spiritual development, one can expand their awareness beyond the classical ego. And this is what Jung called individuation, which is not only the process of becoming whole, but in alchemy, they use an example. They show a picture of two riders on one horse, and one rider has one rein and the other has the other rein, and they're both pulling in different directions. One rider represents the ego and the other one represents the soul or the unconscious. And the horse is totally confused. The horse is a symbol of freedom. So as long as we have this battle in us between our conscious ego and our subconscious and our unconscious, the horse is completely confused, and that creates, in a lot of people, it creates nervousness, anxiety, and it leads to neurosis, which is some kind of a health problem that the body has to use to vent psychic energy, or they're going to have a more serious health crisis or mental crisis. Jung said if it wasn't for neurosis, most people would commit suicide. So the process of alchemy, which is really a very beautiful spiritual path of individuation, which is to become whole as an individual, but to marry the conscious mind, what we consciously think of as our ego, with the unconscious or the soul nature, so that the ego is actually not directing the show. The ego is always referring back to the greater intelligence within it. You can think of the unconscious as intelligent energy. In Tantra, it would be Shakti, which is the divine mother. She's the creator of all that is, including Shiva, which is all that is created. So the goal of alchemy and most legitimate spiritual practice is to first heal the aspects of the unconscious called the shadow, because that has to do with your programming, your wounds, and things that distort your perception of reality and lead to a lot of problems in relationship to self, to other, to drug addictions, to, non-completions, living a life that doesn't gratify you, carrying out, dogmas, being caught in belief systems, in isms, in cults. Only later through therapy do people wake up and go, oh my God, I don't have any idea how I got so caught in all that stuff. So the process of alchemy and the process of legitimate spiritual development is ultimately to bring the ego and the unconscious or the soul into union. So there's only one rider on the horse. And therefore there's a clear sense of direction. One's not divided inside. There's not two or three or four or five Espens hiding behind those eyes. It's well known that in cases of multiple personality disorder, Jung said he identified patients with over 100 different personalities. Family systems therapy is working on this stuff all the time. Shamanism works on this all the time, and they're dealing with what's called soul loss and soul recovery, which is just another way to address the issue. So how that relates to the body is actually just like you have to project a movie or a slideshow onto a screen. If you point a slide projector out the window, you can't see anything. So our mind, our thoughts are the flow of spirit. And so you can think of that as the light being projected, and the body is like the screen. Most people don't have the depth of self-awareness to actually, unless you're a very skilled actor, to have thoughts, feelings, and emotions that they can project that are not true while getting the body to tell us a different message. In other words, if someone's depressed, it's very hard for them to get their body to act out the expressions, the life of, and the movements of, and the energy of a happy person. And the body is also, if you flip the coin over, because the body is embodied, remember, by definition, mind, according to Dr. Daniel Siegel, a very skilled psychiatrist, mind is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So in that we see mind, that which is pure spirit, you can't weigh or measure mind, yet it flows. Spirit is the flow of energy and information, is an embodied and relational process. And we can easily pick up the relational process. If I say, Espen, hold up your hand and tell me what you're looking at, you're surely going to say, my hand, right? And then I'm going to say, well, that's a possessive. So what you're saying is you're not actually your hand or your body, you're something else. And that is the soul. That's the spirit in possession of and animating the body. So the body is like the projector screen that spirit and soul animate. And it is through the body that we experience the richness of emotion, the richness of intimacy. The body concentrates thoughts, feelings, and emotions like an amplifier amplifies a signal from a CD player or a record player. And that's one of the main reasons we want a body as a soul. Because it's, what's the difference between having sex with a real woman and watching pornography? Well, you can watch it, but you don't have the interaction and the intensity of the experience, because the pornography, the best it can do is trigger imagination, but you can't really carry it through. This is why Dr. Mark Goffney calls pornography pseudo-eros. Eros is God's desire to penetrate and create novelty. It's Cupid's arrow, right? So God wants to penetrate, move into, and create something completely novel, which is why there's no two people ever the same. Even identical twins don't taste chocolate and have the same experience. So when you come into a body, you have this way of concentrating experience, and you have this way of concentrating sensation, and you have the way of concentrating the whole life process so that it becomes deeply tangible. And your body is actually the vehicle of experience. It is where you experience I amness. The soul without a body, you could say, is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So a soul without a body can't hold its hand up and say, I am. When we take that back to my work, for example, as a therapist, one of the first things I'm interested in is how a person's breathing. Because if a person's body is doing what it normally does, and the subconscious mind is heavily linked to the autonomic nervous system, which is there to keep you alive, if a person's breathing, for example, is inverted, which is really common, and when they inhale, they tighten their abdominal wall, and when they exhale, they relax it, that's a sign that they've at some point had so much fear that they're still bracing themselves. So it could have been, being abused by a parent. It could have been being embarrassed in front of people to the point that they lock up inside. If someone's overly breathing through their chest, they'll be breathing too fast, which will disrupt their ability to retain carbon dioxide. Oxygen will overstimulate the sympathetic system, which will elevate cortisol levels and repress melatonin levels and lead to a person whose capacity to heal their body is very diminished, who can't sleep well at night, who will be going to a lot of doctors and getting on a lot of pills, which will make them worse. So what I'm showing you very simply is all I've got to do is look at a person's posture, look at their gesture, compare that to see if there's harmony between the words, the body, the gesture. Then I look at the breathing, and because the body is a biological organism that wants to be healthy and vital, I mean, its intention is always to be as safe and as whole as it can. If the breathing apparatus is not working right, then I know that we've got some unresolved issues. And from the other perspective, a more general perspective, how a person moves their body is really often a very important indicator of harmony and coherence. To prove this to people and show people how we are actually archetypally wired for being attracted to symmetry, in my lectures all over the world, I would do a demonstration. And so I would choose men out of the audience, and I would purposely choose somebody that was, kind of skinny and not too muscular. Then I would choose a bodybuilder that was really bulky, and I would choose a man that was very athletic and symmetrical, maybe a track and field athlete type. But I would generally bring about 5 men up on stage, and I would ask them to face away from the audience and take their shirts off. And then I would just have a bench sitting up there, and I'd have them all sit on the bench with their backs facing the women. Then I would say to the women, I'd have the women close their eyes while I had the guys take their shirts off and sit on the bench. Then I'd say, okay, while your eyes are closed, I want you to open your eyes. I'm going to give you 10 seconds, and I want you to pretend you have to choose one of these men to marry within 10 seconds. Ready, set, go. And then I would say, okay, I'd point women out. Which one? Oh, the second one over. And I would just show everybody that the women knew very quickly which one they want. Then I'd say to the women, how long did it take you to choose who you wanted to marry? Most women didn't need more than about 2 to 3 seconds. Why? Because they looked at the symmetry. In nature, symmetry means survivability. So why that's important is because we are actually reading people's bodies, and we're not just saying, oh, that person's overweight, that person's underweight, that person's got good skin, or that one's got big biceps or whatever. The psyche's looking at this from an archetypal perspective, because ultimately safety and security and survivability is what interests a woman, because if she's going to carry a child, she has to know that whoever her man is can protect her and feed her and hunt for her and the child, or she ceases to exist in the reality that we emerge from. So what I'm showing you is that kinesiology is very, very deeply woven into the psyche. And even somebody who's not a trained kinesiologist is actually very kinesiologically inclined, because we can just watch them walk across the street, and with quite good accuracy to tell who's sick, who's depressed, who's strong, who's happy. We can tell by the way a person walks how stable they are in themselves. When it comes to the science of exercise, I have a very simple rule that's very kinesiologically based. I tell all the people that I teach, when it comes to performing an exercise correctly, remember this simple rule. If it looks ugly, it is. So if you're watching someone deadlift or squat or lunge or clean and jerk and it looks ugly, it's a guarantee that there's something wrong with the form, because when you do exercise correctly, it almost looks like the weight's lifting itself. There's an ease and an efficiency. There's a transfer of ground reaction forces. There's a harmony in the kinesiology of the body, the way the muscles distribute the load, the way the joints distribute the load. And somebody that's healthy, that is well-centered in their body, has more the appearance of a lion moving through the jungle, or a tiger, and less the appearance of someone that spends too much time on social media eating junk food. which lions would have avoided anyhow because they wouldn't want to make themselves sick, metaphorically. So you can't escape the reality of kinesiology, and you cannot possibly separate kinesiology from spirituality or the soul or the unconscious or the subconscious, because one side of the coin is, you could say, the person in the body, and the other side of the coin is the body itself. And the two are always in a two-way relationship with each other. When the problem starts is when the body gets sick enough that it is not a good sounding board for the mind and the heart and the instincts anymore, so the body can get sick and it can't reflect the mind accurately, or the mind can get sick and then it makes choices that distort the body's ability to be a healthy interface with the mind. So it's like, it's like a three-legged race. You know what a three-legged race is?
No, I think you're about to tell me. Go.
Well, a three-legged race is done in elementary schools and fairs and stuff, where you put two people side by side and you take two pieces of rope and tie the leg that's touching their leg together.
Mm-hmm.
And then you race a bunch of people. And the two people that win the race are the people that can move in harmony together and can run real fast without wiping each other out. And it's kind of a funny race to watch because you see people struggling and wiping out all over the place. And so that's what it's like between the body and the soul or the mind. If the person's out of harmony and they're not living true to themselves, then the body keeps tripping the mind, or the mind keeps tripping the body. And you have someone who is really lacks freedom in their life. They lack freedom of emotional expression, or they lack freedom of their ability to create, or they lack freedom because their body is limiting them so much and there's a lot of pain. And so one imprints itself on the other. So therapy, even teaching exercise, if it's done properly, can't be just a body job. There are psychological reasons some people cannot do certain lifts. A simple example of that is, men are classically addicted to the bench press. Young men that are not very intelligent, all you hear in the locker room is how big is your dick and how big is your bench press, because that's the nature of young, dumb, and full of cum type people. And so, but from a psychological perspective, the act of pushing away is what a child learns before it has language to say no. If mom stuffs a big piece of roast beef up to a kid's mouth and it doesn't want it before it has language, it'll push it away. So that's the first act of separation, is to push away. So the act of a bench press is actually the child still saying no, usually to daddy, and having daddy conflicts. So if you start analyzing how many men are fixated on the bench press, it almost always points back to a childhood where the parents were over-controlling, and you see there's unresolved, typically father-son drama. The act of pulling, any pulling exercise, what do you do when you hug someone to express love? You pull them into you. So any pulling exercise is the act of inclusion, which is the equivalent of saying yes. So people that cannot pull effectively, even when they're using light weights, almost always have some kind of a psychological issue about why they don't want people too close to them, such as a sexual trauma. So they don't want to do movements, because when the body moves in a pulling pattern, it's telling the mind you're saying yes to, you're including. But if they have fear around including, which you can feel if you hug a lot of people, they're like wood and they don't lean to you. They stay away. So they don't want to be pulled in. The act of turning the body or twisting is the act of observing. If you can't turn your spine in nature, you cannot see what's around you or behind you, which radically increases your chances of death. So people that have, for any reason, a fear of looking what's around them will have a hard time with any rotational exercises. And so that could be, for example, if your mother or father was an alcoholic or somebody with a very bad temper that had emotional outbursts, and you were afraid because if you looked, you might actually get hit by them. So there's a lot of different ways this can happen. Squatting, you go from a short person to a taller person. The child always wants to pull themselves up to a standing position so they can see what everybody else is seeing. So that relates psychologically to the concept of hierarchy. Daddy's the chief, he's the biggest. Mommy's the next chief, and she's a little bit shorter than daddy, and I'm the little guy, and I want to be like them. So at a psychological level, our ability to come from a bottom position is a child trying to pull itself up. When it loses its balance, it falls back to the ground and either squats or lunges its way back up to a higher vantage point. So you can see that wherever there's trauma about one's ability to gain rank or position or acceptance in a family, they have a hard time rising up because they've been psychologically suppressed. So paradoxically, all the things that, this is why I say anything, whatever you can't do in a gym, you must do. With regard to my 7 primal movement patterns, squatting, lunging, bending, pushing, pulling, twisting, and gait, all while standing on your own 2 feet, not using machines, because that shuts off your core and your balance centers and leads to dysfunctional motor programs that, without a long expression, screw the body up. Lunging is the act of getting over an obstacle. If you were out in the woods and there was a log across the trail, you'd have to lunge over it. So people that have a hard time getting over obstacles have a very hard time in the gym with lunging exercises because the psychological imprint is, I can't get over that. So a lot of people have to confront what are called in psychology impossibility walls. So they have ideas in their mind like they have resent towards people that have a lot of abundance and wealth or drive really nice cars. And they'll say things, oh, lucky bastard, his parents are probably rich, or I'll never be able to live that way. You know, and so you just hear a long list of excuses about why they can't overcome the obstacle. Yet they're projecting their own insecurities as jealousy and resent of those that can do it. So in a nutshell, when a person has a hard time lunging, I'm going to start investigating where there's been obstacles they couldn't overcome and how that's affected the development of the ego and the psyche. And most of the time it's because they haven't developed an ego. When people have those kinds of obstacles, they have a hard time developing an ego. Bending is the act of adapting. So, for example, if you try to ride a horse with your legs locked straight, you'll get thrown off in no time. If you try to ski with your legs locked straight, you'll have big problems. You'll get ejected off your skis or you'll just wipe out. If you try to ride a motocross bike without bending your knees, you'll have the same problem you have riding a horse. So the ability to bend, to come down, which is similar to squatting, means to be able to absorb the undulations of life, to be able to adapt to a changing ground. So when people have a hard time bending, it almost always signifies to me psychologically that I have to look at where they had some kind of event or series of events in their life that they had a really hard time adapting to, like mom and dad getting a divorce when you're 6, because often the children internalize that and they actually wonder what they did wrong. So they actually internalize the stress of the divorce as though it was something wrong with them, and because they think that maybe they're not lovable, mom and dad can't stay together anymore, and that can lead to a whole lifetime where they have a very hard time adapting to changing circumstances. and can be very afraid to get into relationships for fear that they might destroy another one. So with just this is the kind of training that CHEK professionals get so that they can actually really know which questions to ask to get to the right issues that are driving the problem, so that they can at least, depending on their skill set, know who they need to refer to, because the CHEK Institute teaches a multidisciplinary approach. So does this person need a psychologist with hypnotherapy skills to get some of these core issues? Do they need to have a test to see what their attachment syndrome is and whether they have a healthy attachment, and whether there was parent traumas and how their parents shaped their psyche? Do they need relationship counseling because they're still carrying out these programs and it's destroying their close personal relationships? And oftentimes, paradoxically, people with a lot of these challenges go to the gym and develop exercise addictions because they're armoring their body up, because psychologically they think that they're going to keep running into these problems wherever they go. So they often internalize the idea that if I make myself really strong or a really good fighter, people won't hurt me anymore. So oftentimes, interestingly, when I work with professional athletes and athletes of all types, I often find at the root of their desire to be so fit is that the fitness and the strength is a compensation for a deep-seated, unresolved fear.
Yeah.
When I was a fighter on the Army boxing team, I'll make the story short because there's a fair bit to it, but I had a very, very violent stepfather who, put people in the hospital, let's put it that way. And after I won a championship fight, unfortunately, I hit this guy so hard the doctors could barely wake him up. And at first I was scared. I thought I killed the guy, but I also detached his retina. And I didn't do anything illegal. I just hit him really hard. And I went in the change room, even though I won the tournament, and I sat there and I just had this flood of emotion and tears just pouring out of me. And the preface to this is this guy was a very, very skilled fighter with a lot of experience. And in this tournament, I was watching him come up the other side of the bracket. And this was a 3-day tournament. He was knocking people out cold, sometimes in as little as 25 seconds. And he was a guy from Puerto Rico that had a long background of boxing and a good track record. And so I kept watching this guy going, holy shit, if this guy makes it to the top, I'm going to have to figure out how to take this guy out because he hits like freaking lightning. And so sure enough, I'm fighting him for the championship, and he hit me so hard that it felt like lightning running through my body, and my whole left arm became paralyzed and I couldn't move it. I was like having to shake my body to get my arm to move. And I'm like, holy Christ, if this guy hits me like that again, I might go unconscious. I really got to do something about this. So fortunately, the bell rang and I sat down in the corner, and my corner man, Nathaniel Finch, who was at that time the U.S. heavyweight champion in amateur boxing, said, Paul, you got to take this guy out right now. And so, interesting, we had been practicing a technique, which is very unusual. And that was as soon as the ref rings the bell to start the new round, you sprint across the ring and you hit him with the hardest shot you can throw, because nobody ever expects someone to run at you out of the corner. So it kind of shocks the opponent into like, what's this guy doing? And so that's what I did. When the bell rang, I just sprinted over and hit him with the hardest right hand I could throw, and it took him out. But the point I'm leading to is I felt like I was fighting for my survival, and a primal fear rose up into me that I'd only experienced in my childhood when my father was being extremely violent or my brother was trying to beat me with electrical cords or weapons, and where it was very dangerous. And I knew that if I didn't do something, I was going to end up dead. And so the shock for me was I had the realization that all the years living with a father that was that dangerous had channeled themselves through me, and that it was my father that hit this guy. It was my fear of my father. It wasn't really me, the boxer. It's because when he hit me so hard, it reminded me of my dad hitting me with chunks of wood or a shovel or something. And I felt like the broken child in me said, I got to take this guy out because the outcome's not going to be good. And so the next time this was on a weekend, the next day we got to the boxing team because we trained 7 days a week. So I got all the boxers in a circle and I said to them, I have a question for you. How many of you became boxers because your father was violent and you felt if you didn't learn to fight, he was going to really hurt you or somebody in your family, and you felt like you had to protect you and your family? Of the 30 fighters on the team, and this is the third ranked amateur boxing team in the world, 28 hands went up. So I've just given you a tour of the psychology of kinesiology and the kinesiology of psychology.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is why I wanted Paul Chek back. Man, I loved how you started by breaking down the difference between the unconscious and the subconscious, and then it just rolled from there. I'm so happy that CHEK University exists and that you're out there with Spirit Gym doing what you're doing, because I, for one, I'm a certified personal trainer. I was a PT for 12 years, and I had no idea of the things that you teach. This needs to be in for every therapist, every person specializing or teaching movement needs to know these principles of how the different movements like squatting and pushing and pulling and so on has a psychological seed or origin. I think this is mind-boggling for me, and I'm going to go back and listen to that again, because I'm even seeing myself now, and I have such a love for movement, but I've seen myself doing more pushing than pulling when I reflect upon it, and that just makes a lot of sense for me. So thank you for highlighting that.
One pattern I left out before you move on is gait. Gait psychologically correlates to destination. If you can't walk, you can't arrive. So when people have the inability to walk or they're in pain with walking, it creates the psychological fear that I won't be able to arrive. If somebody has been wounded by destination, such as say your parents were split up and this week you were supposed to go to your dad's, but your dad is very violent or maybe he's a drunk, then the fear of arrival can actually imprint itself in the body and create things like SI joint disorder or chronic knee pain or foot pain, because those are all regions that are in the distribution of the sciatic nerve, which is linked to the root chakra, which is all about safety, security, tribal association, and wanting to belong. So you can massage and mobilize and chiropractorize and do whatever you want till the cows come home, but you're just treating the symptoms. And that's the pain teacher basically manifesting the psyche to prove that you're right. In other words, paradoxically, what you don't want to be right about, you end up being right about, i.e., Dad's been long out of the picture. You're 25 years old now, but this chronic inherent belief that arriving leads to pain imprints in itself that disrupts the kinesiology of the body and manifests an inability to walk without pain. So gait or walking, jogging and running all relate to destination. So whenever there's a issue about arriving, there is going to be some kind of a physical correlate to that issue.
Okay. So the way I'm tuning into this and what I'm going to be doing personally is I'm going to be listening to this interview again, and then I'm going to be pausing for each of them and taking notes on myself. because I can see how my body, the old saying, it's a book as well. The body is the barometer of the soul. The body never makes a mistake. What is it trying to teach you? And I'm going to go and reflect upon this in my own reality, and also use it in my psyche when I do pulling type exercises, because I've been doing more pushing than pulling. This is so interesting to look at it from that level. And I know many of our listeners and viewers are very health conscious, very fit. So this is going to be very impactful for them. We've got time for one last question before we wrap up. And I'm just going to ask it in this way. Again, imagining that you were on the world stage, every sentient being alive is gathering, watching, tuning in to your message. When you're ready, Paul, take a breath and in your own time, share what is your message to the world right now?
Well, last time I told you the answer to that question was use your heart to feel what you know. But this time I'll quote Shakespeare, "To thine own self be true, or thou canst be true to any other man." Our capacity to love is limited by our ability to love ourselves. We won't give more love to another that's authentic than we can give to ourselves. If we can't be honest with ourselves, we become unconscious about the fact that we're not being honest with other people. Really, the first and most important question of all spiritual development is, who am I? And until a person's really clear on that, they don't know who's making the decisions inside of them. And that's why there's often so much inner conflict about, should I do this or shouldn't I do that? Should I have sex with this person or shouldn't I? Should I spend money on this or shouldn't I? And so you see people in a state of inner conflict, which often, by the way, shows up as digestive disorders, because the physical body is basically an organism of experience for the emotional and mental aspects. So if a person cannot digest a relationship, or cannot digest an idea, or cannot digest the workload in school because it's too much for them, then that is symbolically expressed through the digestive system, because that's the part that represents digestion. So each part of our organ systems and gland systems are operating at the physical, the emotional, and the mental level. And so when a person's not true to themselves, they have a hard time digesting their own experience. And they also inherently know that they're basically creating illusions by saying, yes, I'm happy, when no, they're not, or pretending they have more money than they do, or that they have more skill at something than they do, which leads to imposter syndrome for a lot of people. So I think the most important task for all of us is to be true to ourselves. And that really requires connection to your heart and getting past, one of the things that it takes is you have to be willing to be your own best friend, your own best fan, your own best source of love and connection and joy. Because to the degree that you depend on other people for validation, love, and a sense of meaning, then you actually have to morph into whatever it is they want you to be, or you don't get that sense of love, connection, validation, and that sense of safety. But inevitably, your mom is going to require you to be one way, your uncle another way, your grandmother another way, your best friend another way, your school teacher another way. So what happens is you can find a person having to don so many masks to try to get wanted and needed and have a sense of value that they don't know who they are anymore. And then they have all these roles they've got to manage. And I got to make sure I don't let mom know that I smoke pot, but I can tell my best friend. And, you start adding up all the laundry list of withholds, and it leads to a crisis of self. And that is one of the key reasons for A, digestive disorders, B, anxiety and nervousness. And that is also a common source of breathing pattern disorders. It's a common source of high levels of cortisol output, which leads to adrenal exhaustion and a long string of negative effects from that. It leads to an inability to sleep well, and the list goes on. So my answer to your question is, to thine own self be true, or thou cannot be true to any other man. And that means that your relationships are never on solid ground.
Okay. Many listeners and viewers tuning in right now, interested in learning more. Spirit Gym with Paul Chek is the podcast.
Yeah, Spirit Gym with Paul Chek. That's my podcast. I put a new one out every Tuesday. Spirit Gym members get the podcast on Monday, and they also get to ask the members of the Spirit Gym podcast members get an hour with pretty much all the guests where they can ask any question of the guest based on the topics covered. The Spirit Gym training program, which is where I mentor people in spiritual development, is myspiritgym.com. I think you have a link for that Penny gave you.
Yep.
And the CHEK Institute is CHEK Institute.com. There's about 1,300 videos for free on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Paul CHEK Live, Paul Chek Live, youtube.com/Paul Chek Live. I think my Instagram is paul.chek. I don't know. I'm not really into social media much.
That's it, paul.chek.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. I've been doing this, as you know, for 41 years. So I've put a hell of a lot of material out there. I've written 12 books and I have a 15-volume set called Welcome to Spirit Gym in press coming out. And the synthesis of that 15-volume book series is the Master Key Lessons that's available through the Spirit Gym membership. And that's 75 pre-recorded lessons on video for about just under 85 hours of training. And then there's a weekly Sangha where I get together with the students, teach them a lesson, and then open it for questions on the lesson and any kind of life support they need from issues of challenges in body, health, relationships, whatever it is. I just open it to support the members. And across the memberships right now, we've got over 600 people. So it's quite a beautiful community.
Awesome, brother. It's such a breath of fresh air to, again, meet and discuss and learn from an embodied teacher.
Thank you.
It's really great to see the way you are sharing and teaching. So, guys, you have the links. Check it out. If you want to learn more from Paul Chek, you know where to go. And again, brother, it's great to have you back. I wish you had more time, but we might actually do a follow-up at some point. Who knows? So listeners and viewers, if you want to hear more from Paul Chek, including what you want to learn more about, please comment on wherever you're watching this, YouTube or whatever, and we'll pay attention to that. And we see if we can bring Paul back in the future too, because I, for one, learned incredible amounts of wisdom today. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your love with everybody.
It's a privilege. This is Paul Chek, everybody.